Writing Out Loud, a program designed to explore in-depth interviews with writers to hear that words have voices.
Hello everyone, I'm Teresa Miller and welcome to Writing Out Loud. My very special guest today is Sister Helen Prejean, who's the author of Dead Man Walking. Thank you for being here, Sister Helen.
Glad to be here.
In your book, you describe yourself as an ordinary person who got caught up in extraordinary events. How did that happen?
Well, I'm a Catholic nun, and I taught in a parochial school, and I was the director of religious ed in a parish. And then I got involved with poor people in New Orleans, African American, in the inner city. And one day I got an invitation to be a pen pal to somebody on death row, and I wrote the person. His name was Patrick Saunier. He wrote back. I visited him. 2.5 years later, I find myself in the execution chamber with him, and he's looking at my face as the last face he'll look at before he's killed by the state. And also I got involved with the victims' families. A boy and girl, a young man and woman had been killed by this man and his brother. Unspeakably terrible. They went to a homecoming football game and they found shot in the head, lying dead in the field afterwards. And these poor parents are going through the worst nightmare any parent fears. And they were very angry toward me because I was the spiritual advisor to the people who killed their children. So there's this tension in me, and I made a bad mistake toward the victim's family because I'm visiting the man on death row and his brother who got a life sentence, but I didn't know what to do with the victim's family. I thought, well, they're not going to want to see me, and I stayed away, but it was out of cowardice. I had a great editor. I don't know what it's like for you when you write, but writing, when I did the first draft of Dead Man Walking, I really downplayed of not reaching out to the victim's family. I said I'd never done this before, and my editor, Jason Epstein, ran the house. He was a hands-on editor. You don't have many of those anymore, but he was helping me, and he said, Helen, you really have downplayed. That was a bad mistake, not to reach out to the victims' families. And he said, well, it was cowardice, wasn't it? I said, you were scared, weren't you? And I said, yeah. He said, look, when you write your book, don't just take people with you on the peaks of the waves when you do it all right. Take them in the troughs when you do it wrong.
When Patrick started writing back to you, how would you characterize your correspondence?
It was light. It was, well, light. Every time I did address the envelope for him, it was death row. I mean, you know, I never addressed an envelope like that. But he liked Garfield the cat. I'd write about Garfield the cat. I mainly just wanted to let him know that he had a dignity to him. I didn't know the crime yet, and that I would write. And so it was steady, back and forth. I'd tell him about life at Hope House. He'd tell me about life in a 6.5 foot by 8 foot cell where he was confined 23 out of 24 hours a day. He was not a complainer. He didn't say, oh, poor me. In fact, he never asked me for anything. I was the one who said I could come visit you sometime. And so the letters were all about that. And then, of course, he could draw little cartoons. He would draw like little cartoon characters, like a little cat on the letters. But coming through in the letters was the aloneness. He had no one to visit him, and terrified.
Was it ever hard for you to separate him from these crimes he was charged with?
Well, the first time I met him, Teresa,
Yeah.
you see, and I'm nervous because we had just been writing the letters. Then I'm nervous about him because I'd never met with somebody who had murdered somebody. And they had locked me in a room. I mean, all the signals you get when you walk into prison as you going into the belly of the beast, because these are the worst of the worst. And so the guards are bringing me through, clanging these gates. There are no soft sounds in a prison, you know, no music, no carpets, just cement floors, metal, and woman on a tier. They're doing the opera in Tulsa, and they've really incorporated that woman on the tier. They incorporated it in the music. And then they locked me in a room, and they said, well, go get your man. And so I'm waiting for him, and then I go, well, anybody can write nice letters. I don't know what he's really going to be. And I never talked to a murderer. Before we had 2 hours, it seemed like an eternity. And then the guards brought him in. Now, I was separated from him. He was locked into like a booth-like thing. And there was this heavy mesh black screen between us. And so, I looked at that screen for the first time, and I was shocked. See, I thought his face would look mean, or his eyes, and he looked so human. It blew me away that he could have a human face. And boy, that was that struggle, because I saw his humanness. I knew he was worth more than this one act of his life. And then, of course, I enter into the journey when I find out about the crime, and then with the struggle of the victims' families. And I was really caught between the two, outraged over what he did. Outraged, and I give talks all over to wake up people about the death penalty. And every time I tell the story of David LeBlanc and Loretta Bork, 17 and 18 years old, who were killed that night. And then the after effects in their family. One family, the boy's family. David's father, Lloyd LeBlanc, that's in Dead Man Walking, is really the hero, because he's the one who shows the path of how you get out from under the hatred and the bitterness to make his way, to be whole again and toward forgiveness. And he taught me what that means.
Did you have strong convictions about capital punishment before you ever met Patrick?
Well, growing up, traditional Catholicism, like a lot of Christian churches, upheld the right of the state to take life, to protect the public from violent people, and I had never thought about it much. But then when I lived in St. Thomas, and I'm learning about all the social justice issues, and there are social teachings of the Catholic Church about being on the side of poor people and looking at it from the point of view of poor people, I had begun to change. So by the time I went to death row for the first time, I was beginning to learn about the death penalty, and I knew that I was not for the death penalty. That basically what it is, in a way, it's kind of like this big old act of despair that people have done terrible crimes and killed, and then as a society we say, well, what we have to do to you is kill you too, and we're imitating them. It's saying this is going to be the solution. You killed and we're going to kill you. I worked through, but I never been personally involved, much less. When I first wrote those letters to Patrick, I didn't know they were going to even kill him. I didn't know how the death penalty worked. We'd had like a moratorium on death penalties all across the country through the 60s, the 70s, and this was the early 80s. So lo and behold, I thought I was only writing letters, then I'm visiting with him, and then 2 years later, I'm there in the execution chamber and they're killing this man in front of my eyes.
It's just such a powerful story, and I can imagine how emotionally wrenching for you. When you first started corresponding with him, he had to make a decision about how to list you, whether as a friend or as a spiritual advisor. Why was that distinction so important?
Well, you know, classification of visitors is real important in a prison. You know, and you have like wife, ex-wife. They want to know if somebody's coming who's an ex-wife, and the prisoners get to list 10 people. And for Patrick, it was just a natural connection. He said, well, I'm a Catholic and you're a nun, will you be my spiritual advisor? And I don't have any idea about the consequences of what that was going to mean. Because when he was killed, they electrocuted him at midnight. And and you brought over to the death house 3 days before to prepare yourself to die. And you're in a cell and the guard's watching you full time to make sure you don't try to commit suicide. That happened here in Oklahoma. Several years ago, man OD'd, got drugs, OD'd, Oklahoma, sent him to the hospital, pumped out his stomach, got him healthy again, and then killed him 1 week later. But all this is part of that protocol of death. But I didn't know that because I was a spiritual advisor, at 5:45 in the evening, after that last meal was served, everybody was going to have to leave the death house except the spiritual advisor. It was going to be me, alone with him. The only place of privacy I had And they captured this in the movie. You see Susan Sarandon going in the women's room, because it was all men. They're all guards. They're all part of this protocol of guns outside, you know, to kill this man. And I could go in the women's room, and you know, and I remember one time in particular, you know, I just took my cross and put my head against that tile wall, like, and I guess it was a selfish prayer. I just said, please God, don't let him fall apart, because I was hanging by a thread. And if he falls apart, I'm gonna fall apart. I've never done this before. And it's so surreal, because, you know, when somebody's dying, if you're with them in the hospital or if they're dying at home, you can see they're dying, they're fading. They're not eating, they're not talking. He's fully alive, and we're talking the way we've talked every one of the visits over the 2 years. He's drinking coffee, he's smoking, he's talking to me. And the only way you know he's going to die is with your mind and your watch.
And you write in your book that this was the first time in those final moments that you got to touch each other.
Right, I touched him as they brought him out to be executed. He said, Warden, can Sister Helen touch my arm? And one time when we had talked, I said, what's the hardest thing about being on death row? He says, I'm never touched. One time, this guard let me touch my little girl. So you never touch. These supermax prisons are all the same way. There's no human touch. What happens to human beings in this? It's all part of the, well, once you posit that you can kill a human being, you can put them so you never have daylight, you can say you're never to be touched again. You can do anything you want to them, really, because they're so beyond the pale of humanness. We've done that anything that's done, forget about getting medical care. Are you kidding? You're on death row. So you have a heart condition. So medical care, people die. They don't get it. It's an unbelievable thing. And you know what, Teresa? When I came out of that execution chamber after Pat was killed, and he looked at my face, and he was trying to protect me at the end, because he said, Sister, look, you can't see this, because this could really scar you. And all I knew was he was going to be alone. And every one of those faces looking at him, from the witnesses and all the people, wanted to see him dead. And I said, I'm going to be there, and you look at my face, and I'll be the face of Christ for you. I'll be the face of love. You look at me when they do this. And he did. And when I came out of the execution chamber, it was the middle of the night. Angola, our Louisiana State Penitentiary, is at the end of a dead end. It's Highway 66. Dark. I just watched a man be killed. I threw up. I vomited. I just went out. All the way, I was just, the crime that he did was horrible, so unbelievable. But then watching a man be killed in this premeditated protocol of death. And I remember thinking right outside the gates of the prison that night, I've been a witness. The people are never going to get close to this. This is like a secret ritual. It's never going to be public. I've been a witness. I got to tell the story. And that's when my mission began, talking, and then writing Dead Man Walking, and then writing Death of Innocence, about accompanying two people I believe are innocent and how broken the system is. You got to bring people there, and that's what writing, that's what writing is. And good writing is you don't have to preach to people, shame on you, you call yourself a Christian, you fought the death penalty. Well, I'm a real Christian, I'm against the death penalty, all that crazy stuff. But when you read a book, it's so powerful because you're quiet, you don't have to debate, you're using your imagination. It's a place of great intimacy when you read a story. And so I knew my job was just to take people there, let them see for themselves, and then make up their own minds.
Well, and you do that beautifully in the book. It's wonderfully written. And there was one scene there at the last where you asked Patrick to pray for you. That was wonderful. What was that about, Sister Helen?
Well, in a way, you feel like you're in a movie when you're doing this. It's a scripted death. You know exactly what's going to happen. Now we're walking. Now he's saying, Sister, please pray, hold up my legs. Now we're coming to the door that leads into the execution chamber. All the witnesses are sitting over here. And I knew I was leaving him then. And I kissed him on the back. The guards had me by the arm. See, I was a wild card. I mean, it was the first time a woman is doing this, all this kind of stuff. I kissed him on the back, and what I meant was, pray for me, remember me to God. He had been on a journey, spiritual journey of his own. I have his Bible all underlined. He was so remorseful. The truth is, as crazy as it sounds, it was his brother who killed the kids that night. Pat was executed. But even if he had been guilty, I would have said the same thing. And I remember the words of Jesus, and the last will be first. Because here was a man who was truly remorseful for what he had done. And he was a very loving person. He was kind to people on death row. He was respectful toward the guards, toward everybody. And this man is being killed. And what I really meant was, remember me to God. And when I got a chance to have a dialogue with Pope John Paul, which happened in the second book, there are two people, Dobie Williams and Joseph Odell in Virginia. Through Joseph Odell in Virginia, Italy got involved in this case, and I got to have a direct talk with Pope John Paul. And I said, when you're walking with a man like that, and he's been rendered completely defenseless, as terrible as his crime was, here he is, a human being. And he says, sister, hold up, please pray God holds up my legs. There is no dignity in this death. Does the Catholic Church only uphold the dignity of the innocent? What about the guilty? And I said, the words of Jesus that came inside my head as I was walking with him was, and the last will be first, and sinners and prostitutes will be brought into the kingdom of heaven ahead of all of you, all the good church-going people. And it's not that it's an automatic thing and that makes him a hero. He wasn't a hero. He and his brother, and he was implicated, had done an unspeakable act. But he was a human being. And that first time, from the first visit that I told you about, when I first looked into his eyes and had that he's worth more than the worst thing he's ever done, is not that what the whole gospel of Christianity is about, that we are all worth more than the worst thing we've ever done, and redemption can be for everyone. And what are we doing as a society deciding, you, and you, you're beyond reach, and we're going to send you into eternity, as if we have the wisdom to make that kind of decision. And I mean, like Oklahoma too, like Louisiana, all the death penalty states, we have in place life without parole for people who've done terrible crimes, and we don't have to kill people anymore. But it's nothing like being there. And that was the last moment with him, and I kissed him on the back, and it was, remember me to God, not talk to him. I pray to him. I ask him to help me.
Do you think executions should be more public?
Oh, absolutely. They're never going to make them public, because I've talked to enough guards and people who have participated in executions. It just had a big spread that came out in Newsweek magazine about 3 weeks ago called I Committed Murder. It's about the guards and the executioners and the wardens who've been participating in this. And maybe in one side of your head, you know it's legal. And as one of the executioners, this guy, Jerry Givens, who killed 62 people in Virginia. But it was all legal now. And he said, I did have that executioner's high after I did it. I went, yes, we got them, man. They did this crime. But he said it begins to weigh on you. I'm the trigger. I'm the one directly killing this person. It's my act of plunging that syringe into their veins that kills them. And he kept being haunted by what he knew the death certificate says that you write on after you've executed a person when it asks for cause of death. What's the cause of death? Do you say heart attack, failure to breathe? He said, I knew what the death certificate said. It says homicide, which means the killing of a human being by another human being. And so he openly, they entitled the Newsweek article what he said, I committed murder. It was all legalized, but that's a defenseless person. And when you make a person defenseless and kill them. What do you call it?
Homicide.
And we try to justify, of course, because you say, oh, look what they did. But finally, what this question is about, it's not what they did. People are going to do terrible crimes, and we're outraged over it. It's about us.
How involved were you with the movie production?
Right there, every line, every scene. I learned a lot about making movies from the movies. Susan Sarandon. Here, I'll give you an example.
Okay.
This is screenwriting now.
Okay.
Because you know in a book,
Yeah.
you want to put all those juicy details and all. So we're sitting at the table, and Mama says to me, Helen, what has drawn you to these people? These are the end of the line people. Can't you hear your mama say that?
Yeah.
Why don't you spend your time with the children and say, Thomas, because they're fresh, they got a chance. Why are you drawn to this? And I had written in a script. I mean, it was short, but it was a nice little Jesus speech. I said, well, Mama, Jesus hung out with the riffraff and the thrown away people and the people that were despised. And Susan Sarandon takes a look at it and she goes, well, she says, that's kind of like the company line, isn't it? So she crosses out my whole Jesus speech and she puts in, well, Mama, I feel more caught than drawn. He asked me to come.
Oh, that's great.
Isn't it? Because you know that audience is coming with you. And when you do something predictable, oh, here goes the nun making the Jesus speech, you lose them. But Mama, I feel more caught than drawn. He asked me to come. And you see a human being everybody can identify with, start getting to be caught in something, you're going along and going along. Something real positive like falling in love or kids getting involved with drugs or whatever.
And here you are in Tulsa for the Tulsa Opera's production of Dead Man Walking.
Yes.
How did the opera and the movie work together to help you get your message out and to raise awareness about the death penalty?
Well, the book, the movie, the opera, we're talking about art. Mm-hmm. Writing is art because you fashion a story where people can read all these little black scribbles on a white page, and they are brought imaginatively into a world, into all kinds of things. And what I'm happy about, the movie then got it out in film. It came out in '96, and Susan Sarandon got the Academy Award for her portrayal of me. And it was a tough part for her because she couldn't wear much makeup and all, and she cried when she saw herself in the dailies, you know.
Really?
Yeah. But see, you want art, you need art because people can't get close to it, so you got to bring them there. And you don't want to do propaganda. Tim Robbins was against the death penalty, but he's not going to make a movie to give 1,400 reasons why you should be against the death penalty. He did art, which means you bring people over to both sides of the issue. So you keep being with the victim's family suffering, then you're over here with the perpetrator and his mama, back and forth. Opera does the same thing. In fact, the opera, the prologue, everybody witnesses the murder of 2 innocent people. And so, and you know who did it? So you're not using any energy, did he do it or not? And then you're saying inside, bring it on. This is what the death penalty is all about. If anybody deserves it, he does it, bring it on. And then along the way, you meet the victims' families and you see their struggle. And you ask them the question, can this help them? By witnessing this, will this really help them heal? And then you meet Joe DeRoche, he's the death row inmate. You meet his mother, who's pleading before the pardon board, don't kill my child. So then you're brought over to her suffering. And you keep being brought back and forth. And Tim Robbins did that in the film of Dead Man Walking. The opera does it, and finally it leaves it with the audience, because we watch justice being done. It's the only opera with 1.5 minutes of silence. And as the execution happens on stage right there, all you hear is the whir of the machines. There's no other sounds. And then at the end, Sister Helen sings out to the audience the song the children was singing right after we saw the terrible murder. Innocent little kids clapping and singing, God will gather us around, all around. Father and mother, sister and brother. And it's that call to be one family, the oneness, to be sisters and brothers to each other. That will always be the call to us.
When you're sitting out in the audience watching this opera, Sister Helen, do you relive these experiences?
Yeah, I do. I relive them, but it's framed because I know now everybody sitting in there is going through this, and I know that it's helping to awaken people to another level of reflection. So there's something redemptive about it for me every time I see. And I mean, everybody asks me, what's it like to have Susan Sarandon portray you? What's it like to have that person come out on the stage? And I'm like a sheet of glass. It is all through me, and I get brought back to all the original things of the happenings and all. And it's bringing the audience there. And I promise, Pat was the first, Patrick Saunier, and he didn't want me to be there. And he said it could scar you. And I said, Patrick, I don't know how it's going to affect me, but I'll tell you this. If they do kill you and I'm there, I will tell you a story across this land. I had no idea. I hadn't written a book. I hadn't done anything, but I just knew. I would tell the story to bring people close, to help them reflect that maybe we can find a better way than killing people.
It's been nearly 30 years since Patrick was executed. If you could write a letter to him now, what would you say to him?
I'd say, hey, Pat, look what's happening. We got a movie going. We have 2 books. There's an opera. And we're at a point now where there is beginning to be diminishment of practice of the death penalty. And I'm like this with you, brother. Eddie is like a brother to me, and I have stayed by his side and visit him and am close to him. And I think that is what would make Patrick the happiest.
Sister Helen, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And thank all of you for joining us on Writing Out Loud.